Arctic. Much like with Lent in the Catholic and the Orthodox tradition, much like Ramadan in Islam, we have a sacred period of the year. It lasts 4 months. It starts in June, July, because we have a lunisolar calendar that we use, and so the months change around a little bit. Because a lunar day is about 29 days. The time it takes for the full moon to wane and become dark, and then wax and become full again, it's about 29 days. And then if you factor in the Earth's rotation around the sun, it ends up being about 30. So you have a little bit over 12 lunar months in the course of a year. A lunar year would be about 360 days. But days are 365. Or 364.25, I think, is probably more exact. Hang on, I just messed up here. Okay, now we gotta make this. And so that's why you get a leap year, to make up that extra quarter day. And 364 days, and then every 4 years you add an extra day, and that accomplishes the missing day, February 29th. So that'll be a solar calendar, so then you know exactly where the Earth is in relation to the sun. But the problem is we don't really live in a solar calendar world. We do partly because the day and the night is based on our relation to the sun. But when you look at the moon, which is another major luminary that affects things and exerts a gravitational pull on the Earth and is significant, especially if you're living in an agrarian culture, then the lunar calendar is distinct from the solar calendar. But if you do the lunar calendar and you focus on the waxing and the waning of the moon, then you miss out on the exact change of the seasons and the fact that it takes exactly 364.25 days to circle the sun. So good calendars generally are lunisolar. They have lunar elements to them, and they also have solar elements to them. And when you do the lunar thing, then the result is that you got to mess around with the months a little bit. And so just that one extra day, February 29th, is not that big of a deal. And in every century on the 00, you skip it. And so in 2000, although it should have been February 29th, there was no February 29th because the Julian calendar made that mistake. And then in the 1500s, they adopted the Gregorian calendar, which made this adjustment that it's every 4 years, but it's not quite every 4 years. And so every 25 4 years on the century, then you skip the leap year, and then that reconciles it. And it might not seem like a big deal, like really, you're going to make a big deal about every 100 years, you got to skip it, but if you look at the Orthodox calendar, because the Catholics came up with the Gregorian calendar, so the Orthodox didn't accept it. And if you look at what's happened in the last, 1,500, 2,000 years, Serbian Christmas is like weeks later than Christmas, because over millennia it becomes weeks and weeks of difference. And so now Serbian Christmas is celebrated in the beginning, middle of January, for example. I'm Serbian, so I know that. But that's true for all Orthodox traditions. I think I lost everybody. Sorry, I'm just going to say it again, but I'm going to try to be more succinct. There are certain benefits which are there by following a lunar calendar, especially when it comes to living in an agrarian situation and the full moon and what that does in terms of being able to see at night. We live in a light pollution place, it doesn't make a big difference. But if you live in a place without light pollution, the full moon night, it's ridiculous. It's like you're walking around in the sun. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's like there's sun. You can see everything. And a dark moon night is ink black. It's pitch black. You can see nothing. And so when you're dealing with a traditional agrarian society, the lunar calendar is as important as the solar calendar. There are benefits to the solar calendar because it tells you exactly how long a year is. There are benefits to the lunar calendar because it's quite natural to see, the waning and the waxing of the moon and to govern your weeks by that. The week is actually an arbitrary unit of measurement based on the Bible. The fortnight is a legitimate unit of measurement based on the movements of the moon, which is a 2-week period. The month the month has no significance from a solar calendar point of view, but from a lunar calendar, the month is very, very important. And so good calendars have both lunar features as well as solar features, and they figure out a way to merge them together. And in Sanskrit, they do that, or in Indian culture, they do that by an extra month that gets added every 2.5 years or so. You add an extra month to the calendar. And that's Adhika Mas, the extra month, the month of Purushottam, so another religious month that we just had. A couple months ago, there was Purushottam Mas, this extra month that only occurs every 2.7 years or so. And that fixes everything. So whether you do it by a complicated system of leap years and you lose out on the lunar benefits, whether you do the lunar calendar and you have to add an extra month to regulate it with the solar calendar, we're all trying to tell time in some way and trying to keep track of the seasons and day and night and the full revolution around the sun. And so what that means is that when we're calculating when Kartik is, it could be as early as late September. It could be as late as maybe late October. It could start. And the monsoon, 4-month period that begins the monsoon season, starts sometime in June or July, depending on the year. So anyway, whatever's going on in your life, in traditional, pious, religious Hindu culture, when the monsoons hit, and specifically when this month of, the first month of Chaturmas hit, the 4 months of the rainy season, you just stop and you stay in one place for 4 months. You don't travel. And you perform religious austerities, which essentially amount to you give certain things up, and then you do extra. Maybe you do extra chanting. You give up, eating spinach, for example, or eating dal, for example, or yogurt. There's different things people give up. So there's things you give up, and then things you do extra. And that happens for 4 months, not for 1 month, not for 40 days like with Lent, not for the month of Ramadan, but it's a 4-month period, a third of the year. It's a pretty serious observance. And then within that 4 months, there's 1 month which is special, and that month is Kartik. And we're in that month now. And there's things you give up during Kartik, like specifically you give up urd dal during Kartik, or really you give up urd dal, milk, yogurt, and spinach. So you give up 4 things in the month of Kartik. Usually we give them up for a month, but you're actually supposed to give up 1 for 4 months, 1 for 3 months, 1 for 2 months, and 1 for 1 month. By the time you're in that last month, you've given up all 4 of those items. And it gets worse. 1 year for Kartik, I ate rice and beans 1 time a day with no salt. And just a small bowl of rice and beans 1 time a day, cooked with no salt or spices for the whole month. And it might not seem like a big deal because it's still a decent level of nutrition, but it was a small amount. So maybe I was consuming like, I don't know, 800 calories or something like that per day. But then the no salt thing and no spices, it's no joke. You don't realize how much you are dependent on spicing and salt for your food until you remove it entirely from your diet, and you're really, eating to live and not living to eat. Then I did a 5-day fast at the end of that where I ate nothing. And so that, people get real severe. And then they sometimes do a thing where they just bow down and you have a bowl of food and you just bow down and eat with your mouth without using your hands like a dog would eat. And then you go down one time, eat as much as you can eat in one go, and then when you get up, that's it for the day. I tried that. It wasn't a good fit. Well, we've been around a long time, so we have a pretty serious, and we're quite ascetic and monastic, and so we have a pretty serious program of religious austerities that we observe for something like Kartik. But the bare minimum, absolute bare minimum, is you sing the Damodar Ashtakam every day, which we'll be singing tonight, and then you also offer a lamp to Damodar. So we have a new deity on the altar that we bring out every year. It's a deity of Yashoda and Damodar and of Radha Damodar. And so we have a deity of Radharani and Krishna, Radha Damodar, and then Yashoda and Krishna. Krishna's a child and Mother Yashoda, and the Yashoda Damodar. So we have both those deities on the altar. It's the only time of year we bring out extra deities for a significant amount of time. And then you offer a lamp to them. So those two things. You offer a lamp and you sing a song. And to really appreciate the song, you have to have a pretty serious background in our theology. The song's not light. It's a pretty serious work of poetry. However, we're just going to go ahead and go through the 4th and 5th verse of the song. We went through 1, 2, and 3 last week, because that's what we do. And I'm going to try my best to throw in the theological underpinnings of the song so that you'll be able to appreciate it. But we'll just do it in real time. Okay. So we'll actually back up. We're going to do the 3rd verse now. So it's 8 verses. It's Ashtaka. And Ashtaka is a collection of 8 verses. Like you have Ashtanga Yoga, the Ashta Angas, the 8 limbs. Ashta means 8. Anga means limbs. So a traditional type of Sanskrit poetry is called an Ashtakam. It's a collection of 8 prayers. And so we have various Ashtakams we sing. We sing the Guru Ashtakam every morning. And there, we have the Shikshastakam from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his primary teachings, and this is the Damodar Ashtakam. We have the Jagannath Ashtakam that we sing at the time of Rath Yatra, and this is the Damodar Ashtakam, which is sung during the month of Damodar. And we'll get to what the word Damodar means in a minute, but we're going to go with the 3rd verse. And the verses are in a Bunjanga Prayata. They're in a particular type of meter, 4 lines, 12 syllables to a line. Namam Ishwadam Satchit Ananda Rupam. So 12 syllables, 4 lines, 8 verses. And we're on the 3rd verse today. Itti drik swa lilabhi ananda kunde swagoshang nima jantam. The first line of this verse is Iti idrik swalilabhi, and thus by such pastimes, swagoshang nima jantam, you immerse your devotees, ananda kunde, in pools of ecstasy. Ananda kunde means 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 pools of ecstasy. by your pastimes, by such pastimes as have just been described, the Lord immerses his devotees in pools of ecstasy. Akyapayantam, and makes it known and declares it. That tadiya ishita gyeshu, declares it to those who are aware of the Lord's majesty. Ishita means his godness, his godliness. So the Lord is declaring it. He's making it known to people who are aware of the Lord's omnipotence, his opulence, his power. It would normally, and this is important to understand, normally if someone was aware of the existence of God and of the qualities of God, such as omnipotence and omnibenevolence and omniscience, that person would be considered to be a member of the faithful. Let me say that again, and please listen carefully. In general conversation, a person who is aware that God exists and that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, that person would be defined as a religious person, as a devotee. That person has arrived. They have understood the truth of spirituality. But what's being stated in this verse is those people are being preached to. Now, if you're aware of God's omnipotence, by the way, you're aware that God exists. It's a precursor. So it's not stated in the verse. The verse doesn't state you're aware that God exists. It just states that you're aware of God's greatness. But if you're aware of God's greatness, then it's an unstated precursor that you are aware that God exists. And furthermore, you're not only aware that God exists, but you're aware that God is not, for example, dystheistic, evil. God's not weak, capable, let's say, being defeated by Satan or something like that. And so if you're aware of God's greatness, you're not just aware that God exists, but you're aware that God exists as a superlative. As a superlative. As the greatest of all beings, as the original being, as a source of all beings, as the most powerful of all beings, the most loving of all beings. And so it's not a light stage of theism. It's actually quite an advanced stage. Someone who is aware of God's glory. And normally that person is a devotee, is a Vaishnav, is a saint, is religious, is pious, is faithful. But those people are being instructed by performing pastimes such as these that have just been described in the first two verses. Krishna immerses or dunks or drowns his devotees in pools of ecstasy, Ananda Kunda, in kunds or pools, man-made pools, made out of ananda, made out of bliss, in pools of bliss, pools of ecstasy. Devotees are being immersed in those pools of ecstasy by these pastimes, and akyapayantam, it's being made known to tadiya ishitagyeshu, to those people who are aware of God's omnipotence. It's being made known bhaktai jitatvam. So those people are aware of ishita. They are gyeshu ishita. These are to the people who are gya. They are aware. That's where you get the word gnosis from in English, from the Sanskrit root gya, which is to know. So gyeshu, to those who know, ishita. Ishita is where you get the word ishwar from. Ishwar means the Lord. It's kind of standard Sanskrit term for the Lord. And ishita means your godliness, your lordness. So it's being made known, akyapayantam, you're teaching those people, bhaktai jitatva. Those people are being taught that the Lord has the quality that he is jita. Jitatva means he has the quality of conqueredness. The Lord has the quality of being conquered, bhaktai, by bhakti. So the Lord is teaching people who understand that God is omnipotent that the Lord actually has the quality of being conquered by bhakti. Do you follow this? It's a pretty radical statement. In other words, that's seen as being above the standard generic, what would be called the classical deity conception, that God's omniscient. There's something above that. And in fact, this was dealt with by a philosopher named Charles Hartshorne, a contemporary philosopher who passed away about 20 years ago. Charles Hartshorne, who himself was an unpacker of Alfred North Whitehead, who was one of the most important Western philosophers in centuries. And Charles Hartshorne, he came up with this thing he called the principle of invidious contrast, which, simply put, he made the argument that we like to think of things in binary terms, that God is male or female, God is white or black, God is active or passive, God is big or small, God is absolute or relative. We divide the world neatly into two buckets. One bucket is deemed good, the other bucket is deemed bad, and we ascribe the good qualities to God, and then we're left with this bucket full of bad qualities that usually gets ascribed to a devil, and you wind up in a really dualistic world where God has nothing to do with much of creation. You follow this? Hartshorne made the point that there are good ways to be relative. For instance, empathy or compassion, or love for that matter, require relativity. You have to be affected by someone else. You have to be sympathetic to someone else. You have to feel for someone else. Arguably, you have to be vulnerable to someone else. A love which included no vulnerability would not really be love. And if it was love, it would be a very attenuated, weakened form of love. Certainly nothing like deep and profound, earth-shattering love, where you truly care about somebody and what they go through matters to you and affects you. What this means is that the classical conception of God, that God is always a cause and never an effect, always absolute and never relative, always active and never passive, leads you to an almost robotic conception of divinity, where God becomes almost like a vending machine, devoid of any real feeling. And you wind up with this heaven is, you're supposed to want to go there, but it sounds extremely boring. And the angels, who are all these castrated eunuchs, have nothing better to do than to watch what's going on earth, because we've got it way better than they do, and they're just living an extremely boring existence, unlike the Jerry Springer reality TV-like world that we occupy. Hartshorne figured this out. And he fought against and argued against the classical conception of divinity. That a deity that was truly perfect, also we think of perfection as being a static state, incapable of any further growth. But there's no reason why infinity can't continue to grow. There's nothing mathematically wrong about having something which is infinite and having that infinite thing have infinity, let's say, added to it, or even to multiply infinity times infinity. The answer is still infinite, but there's nothing wrong with adding to infinity. And so a perfect conception of divinity would have to be infinite and always growing. Would have to be supremely absolute and also supremely relative. Would have to be capable of love and would have to be affected by those parties that the deity loves. This is the truth that's being preached in this verse to standard devotees, to standard people who are generally devotees of Vishnu or Narayan. Narayan, Vishnu, these are the classical conceptions of divinity within Hinduism. Narayan may have a consort, Lakshmi, but he's not particularly attached to Lakshmi. Lakshmi is Chanchala, she goes here and there. Narayan is fixed in one place in Vaikuntha. And they're quite independent of one another. Krishna is contrastable to that, strongly contrastable to that. The Krishna conception of divinity is Hartshorne's perfect deity. And Hartshorne, who taught at the University of Chicago, was a student or was a devotee, was an appreciator of Jiva Goswami, one of our theologians from 5 centuries ago. And he studied his works through a member of our tribe called Brata Brahmachari. There was a brahmachari, a member of our particular sect, who came to the U.S. in the 40s, 30s maybe. And he was an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago, and Hartshorne studied under him. And he studied the works of Jiva Goswami. And that's where he got these ideas from, that he then later put into English. And it became a huge addition to Western philosophy and Western theology. But he owed it to one of our theologians from 5 centuries ago, and there was a preacher who came over and in the guise of being an academic taught, and he taught this philosopher who was a very important professional philosopher, and he went on to teach this. And it makes sense. Bhaktai jitatva. Krishna has the quality of being conquered by bhakti. Because a deity that could not fall in love, a deity that was not conquerable by devotion, a deity who, if you gave your heart to him, wouldn't give his heart back to you, is not all good. Is not all loving. Is not the highest conception of divinity. And so there's this delicate dance, this razor's edge you have to walk if you really want to conceive of a perfect deity. And it has to be a deity which is simultaneously supremely absolute and supremely relative. And of course, that may seem very difficult based on logical principles of propositional logic, like the law of identity and the law of contradiction and the law of the excluded middle, which I'm not going to get into, but if you know them, then there you go. But the very nature of omnipotence is that you would be able, to some extent, you'd be able to overcome some of those limitations. And you'd be able to be everywhere and nowhere. And in heaven and in your heart. And in all things and distinct. And one with the universe and also different. And that difference is not always a fault. Difference allows for love to exist. Love is an amazing phenomenon that unites two people, but it's based forever on a backdrop of difference. If a mother and a child ever literally became one, then the love between them would evaporate. And so love requires difference in order to unite. And celebrating that difference and the incredible possibilities it opens up in terms of loving God and uniting with God is what bhakti is all about. So the pastime that's being referred to, and I said generally the pastimes are heard after we've understood our theology, but they also, if they're properly taught, they can explain a lot. The pastime is that Krishna came to this earth thousands of years ago, incognito, to give us a glimpse of what heaven could look like. And he brought angels with him. This is a religious claim. And so you can subject it to scrutiny, but it's a claim about the nature of God and the nature of God's miraculous interactions with the world. And at some point, when people are making spiritual claims, you have to subject it to a spiritual form of scrutiny. If all I've got is a thermometer and you tell me what the air pressure is, and I try to use my thermometer to measure the air pressure, it's not going to work. And so when you're looking for evidence for something, it's critical that you look for appropriate evidence for the phenomenon you're investigating. If I wanted proof that you love me, and I wanted proof the same way there's proof of what the temperature is based on reading a thermometer, I would be in trouble. Because although love may exist, love has different types of evidences. Or, for instance, I want to believe that you were conscious. There is no objective way to demonstrate your consciousness to me. You could, theoretically, be a philosophical zombie. You could be a person who behaved as if they were conscious, but there was no light on inside. All I see are the symptoms of consciousness. But that's not the same as the actual experience of consciousness. I know I'm conscious because I'm experiencing my own consciousness. Can I ever exactly experience your consciousness? I cannot, because consciousness, by its very definition, is intimate and personal and not experienceable by anybody other than yourself. This gave rise to a new branch of philosophy called phenomenology. That some things were only subjectively available. They could never be objectively demonstrated, but yet they exist. And that, an example of that, a traditional example of that, is other people's minds. That you could never prove in a laboratory, but nonetheless you would be foolish not to believe that other people are conscious. So we make a spiritual claim. Thousands of years ago, God came into this world with a bunch of angels to give us a glimpse of what heaven's like. And in our sacred texts, those heavenly activities are recounted. And by hearing them submissively with an open and receptive heart, magic happens. And you start to fall in love with God. And that huge yes in your life where you start to fall in love with God is this incredibly potent tonic that enables you to live a virtuous life and to not wallow and to, fly on wings like eagles, to quote the Bible. The huge yes in your life of falling in love with Krishna becomes a very, very powerful catalyst that enables you to do things that otherwise would be near impossible. And so we want to fall in love with Krishna. We don't want to love God in like a very, abstract and dissociated and anesthetized way. We want to love God in an intoxicated, full-hearted, intense way. We want to love God more than anything. We want to fall in love with God. In fact, our poets generally use romantic language to describe their feeling for divinity. Sufis do this also. If they're in Qawwali music in Pakistan, the Muslims got into it also. You even find it in the songs of Solomon, which are romantic and seem like they're about a king and his queen, but they're actually, it's a metaphor for the soul's love for God. And so we use this kind of language, as you'll see, if we get that far, as you'll see. Krishna is making it known to the world through these pastimes. And the pastime that's being referred to is Krishna had a mother, an angel, who fell so madly in love with Krishna that she started thinking Krishna was a child. That seems insane. And it seems insane to the Western mind because we're always taught that God is your father, and maybe if you're super exotic and really kind of left-handed, then maybe you think of God as your mother. And then maybe if you just go to like the absolute outskirts of any religious expression, you might think of God as your husband or wife. Such things are found also. It's very minutely scattered within religious traditions. But this even goes a step further. Not only are you not thinking of God as your father or your mother or your lover, you're thinking of God as your child, which is diametrically opposed to the basic structure of the universe, which is that there is a source of everything. Therefore, God is literally the source of all existence. How could you love God as your child? That's what Krishna was trying to highlight. You can fall so in love with Krishna. If you fall sufficiently in love with Krishna, then you forget who's higher and who's lower. Because real, intimate love has to dispel hegemonies. Just like in any kind of civilized society, you are not allowed to date your patients or your clients. It'll lose you your license in therapeutic settings, and perhaps also in legal settings and medical settings. It's severely frowned upon, and it's oftentimes illegal. And the reason it's illegal is because there's a natural hegemony. There's a natural power differential between someone who acts in certain roles in society. And therefore, if you were to seduce your underling, even if they said, I'm okay with it, even if they said that, it doesn't count because the power differential is such, it's understood that they lack the ability to choose freely. Like a child lacks the ability to choose freely if the power differential is too much. Therefore, intimate love is impossible in civilized society between an elder and a junior. And with good reason. But now you got to think about how much infinitely greater God is than us. The example, if we try to compare ourselves to ants and God to a giant, that would just be a horrible comparison. Because Krishna is so much more of everything than we are to an ant. It's a terrible comparison. And maybe you compare a microbe to a demigod. It's a terrible explanation. You're comparing the singularity to something else, which will never be a singularity. It's a singularity precisely because it's not comparable to anything else. That's why it's the singularity. So, how is it if the fundamental nature of reality is that we can never fall intimately in love with God because we are always below God unlimitedly and incalculably? Then there would be a great disservice because we'd never be able to fall in love with Krishna the way we could fall in love with each other. And so this is reconciled in our tradition because when you fall enough in love with Krishna, you forget he's God. And you start to just love him as your best friend. Or even as your child. And so Krishna came here, behaved as a child, and Mother Yashoda suckled Krishna from her breast. Punished Krishna. Krishna would carry his father's shoes on his head. Krishna had a father and a mother. Krishna's father would be like, I want to go out, bring me my shoes. And Krishna would so small, he would have to take his father's shoes and carry them on his head. And Krishna would run barefoot with his father's shoes on his head, which were like a heavy item for him to carry, so that his father could take a walk. And he would cry, and his mother would come and grab him and suckle him from her breast. This is Krishna Lila. It's this impossible but bewitchingly beautiful idea that you could fall in love with God so much that Krishna becomes your child. Krishna becomes your friend. Krishna becomes your charioteer, your chauffeur. Krishna became Arjuna's chauffeur, which is a very low position, and Shudra position in Hindu culture. But Krishna became the charioteer of Arjuna and drove him around. Go here, go there, do this, do that. And Krishna obeyed his devotee and did what he wanted. When we hear this, we don't think this means that God is low. Our heart aches when we hear this. And we think, how wonderful is Krishna? He never fails his devotee. He's so accessible to his devotee. He's always there with him in whatever way they need him. Even you don't want Krishna, he stows away in your heart and waits for you to change your mind for eternity. Just in case you decide you might want to turn towards him, so he's not too far away. Always arranges for good teachings to be there, for good lessons to be there, for you to be able to learn from every experience you have to go through. And even you do terrible things and require to get some karma, even that's just so that you'll learn from your mistakes. It's the way an all good God would create the world. And giving you good advice and guidance, but never so much that it compromises your free will. Always leaving the choice up to you. And if you want to, Krishna will become like your child, like your best friend. This is why we worship Krishna as a baby. That's why in our iconography, you'll see Krishna as a baby with his mother and his father. It seems almost incomprehensible. It doesn't make any sense. We've got a baby Jesus movement in Protestant Christianity in this country, but there's no philosophy behind it. It's just kind of like a cute Smurf type deal. But there's actually a theology behind this. Bhaktai jitatvam puna prematastam shatavriti bande. I am offering my obeisances filled with love hundreds of times considering this. I'm thinking of this, that the Lord is doing two things at once. He's drowning his devotees who get it, who are in the know, with these pastimes in just ecstasy because they're falling in love with him. And he's also instructing those people who are outside of that bubble and who just can't even fathom an intimate love with divinity. He's instructing them, just see, I'm conquered by love. And a full conception of divinity would be that. All right, that was the recap of last week so that we could start with this week, but we're just going to move real quick now. The next verse is Varam deva moksham na moksha avadingva natchanyam vrineham vada isha api iha. Now the author was, up till this point in the first three verses, he was talking to us about Krishna. Now he switches and he begins to address Krishna directly. So he starts off by saying, I'm worshiping the Lord who has this form, who is like this, who performs these pastimes, who does this, who is accomplishing all these means. But then he says, Deva, Damodar, Ananta, Vishnu. Oh no, that's another one. Varam Deva, sorry, another one. That's the sixth verse. Varam Deva, O Lord, who are Vara Isha, who are the Lord of all benedictions. You're the Lord of all benedictions. Varam Deva Moksha Na Moksha Vadingva Na Chanyam Vrineham. Vrineham. I don't ask for. Varam, the boon of moksha, liberation. I don't ask for the boon of moksha avading, even the highest possible liberation. Like just, if there's a generic liberation and there's something above that, I don't even want that. Varam deva moksha na moksha avadingva na chanyam vrine ham. I don't ask. Na cha anyam vrine. I'm also not asking for anything. Na chanye vrine ham vada isha apiha. I'm also not asking for anything else in this world that may be available. So what the prayer is saying is that you may pray for a good job or a good spouse, or not to get, your biopsy comes back cancerous, or you may pay for world peace, or you may pay for a raise, or you might pay to do well on your test, or for somebody to have a safe journey or something like that. Also the things people pray for, kind of good and bad on a selfish, selfless, material scale. He's saying, I'm not praying for any of that stuff. You can give me anything. You're Varisha. You can give any benediction. But Iha, in this world, I'm not praying for Anya, anything else. I'm not even praying for liberation. I don't even want to go back to heaven. I don't even want to be liberated from my suffering. So he's thinking about this quality and what Krishna is teaching the world through these pastimes about what's possible in terms of the soul's relationship with God. And then he gets inspired and he begins praying to Krishna directly in his prayer. So now the prayer has gone from being instructive to us to demonstrative because he's actually praying directly to Krishna. And then he says, so, if I'm not praying for liberation, and I'm not even praying for eternal life in the spiritual world, or what to speak of anything in this world that everybody here prays for, what's the question? If I'm not praying for any of that, if our author is not praying for any of that, what's the natural question you're going to have? Huh? What are you going to pray for? That's the natural question. Idam te vapu nata gopala balam. This, idam means this. This and that. Right? This means here. That means there. This. Idam te. Your. Idam te vapu. Your form. Your form. If Krishna did not have a spiritual form, you wouldn't be able to fall in love with Krishna either. If Krishna was just a force, you wouldn't be able to fall madly in love with Krishna. Therefore, for eternal love to exist, God must have a spiritual form in perpetuity. That is the source of the cosmos. We generally think anthropically about form. And we think of God as a form, God's form be made out of flesh and blood, like our form is made out of it. But there's no reason to suppose that spiritual form could not exist. Form unfettered by any of the inadequacies of matter, such as being subject to old age and entropy, or flaws or gravity, all the things we're subjected to. There's no reason logically why God could not have a form made out of eternality, bliss, and knowledge. In fact, that was mentioned at the outset of the prayer. Krishna is Satchit Ananda Rupa. He has a form made out of eternality, bliss, and knowledge. That was specified in the first verse. So now, idam te vapu, your form, Nata, O Lord, Gopala Balam, your childlike form as a cowherd boy. That form, Sada me manasi, in my mind forever, that form, Avirastam, let that form be manifested in my mind forever. Kimanyai, what else? What else is there? He finishes with this exclamatory question, this rhetorical question. What else is there? I don't want liberation. I don't want to go to heaven. I'm not going to ask you for anything in this world. What do I want? I just want that form, as a loving child that is conquered by the love of his devotees, that form and nothing else is forever in my mind. Let me go to hell. That's okay. Let me stay in this world. That's okay too. Let me take birth again. No problem. Let me be poor or rich or a demigod or an ant. None of it matters. All I want is just one thing. This form, that I've realized now that this form is the highest manifestation of divinity. That form, that beautiful form, that bewitching form, that seductive form, that gorgeous form, that impossibly beautiful and attractive form. Krishna is known as Madan Mohan. He is the person who seduces Cupid. Cupid is Madan. Krishna is Madan Mohan. He seduces Cupid. He's so beautiful. The word Krishna means the all-attractive. That beautiful form as a child, loving his devotees so much that you become like a child for your devotees and they suckle you from their breast. For sure, Nanda Maharaj takes Krishna for walks and puts out his finger. Krishna holds onto his finger with his hand. For sure they have that rust. There's no doubt. Krishna carries his father's shoes, but he himself has cow dung smushed between his toes. And we pray to that Lord who loves his devotees so much he carries their shoes on his head while he himself walks barefoot. What a beautiful conception of divinity. In many ways, it takes the most beautiful ideas about Jesus. That the Lord came into this world to suffer on our behalf, to just be there for us, to ask for nothing in return. These ideas, to wash the feet of his disciples, to wear a crown of thorns, to be crucified that we may know eternal life. These kind of beautiful features of Christianity that have been enduring for thousands of years. It takes those ideas and removes all the weird cannibalism and violence and all sorts of the weird, death cult and worshiping God's suffering and all that kind of stuff. It's just profoundly disturbing if you think about it. Gets rid of all that, keeps the good stuff, and multiplies it times infinity. Kimanya, what else is it? What else do I need? And so our theologian has explained it. He's explained what's happening in this pastime, and then he himself becomes affected by it and demonstrates for you in real time the way that you feel upon realizing this. This idea, and we'll finish with this, this idea is so ridiculously and impossibly beautiful and represents such a zenith in the evolution of spirituality that I heard this idea when I was 17, maybe 16, definitely by the time I was 17. I heard this idea and I thought, they nailed it. Like, these are my people. And it's not possible that they could have figured this out with some kind of algorithm or through trial and error. This must have been a revelation. This must have been handed down from above. Such a beautiful idea. Such an incredible idea. That the one without a second, that the singularity, that the source of all reality is also the source of all goodness, and therefore is also the source of all love, and therefore is also intimately available at all times. And therefore you're also capable of forgetting that Lord's divinity and falling madly in love with that Lord, and he also forgets his own divinity and falls in love with you. And you live like a family. Like a loving family. And he'll be your parent if you want him to be. He'll also be your child. Depending on the flavor of your heart, the flavor of your soul, what you're looking for. And that impossible idea is so attractive. You hear it and you're like, okay, I want that. And you don't think, well, I'm not qualified for it. That thought just goes away. And you just think, I want that. And that is a major milestone in your spiritual life. That is low, that's greed for Krishna, and that becomes powerful enough that it overwhelms all of your material desires, overwhelms all of your inadequacies, and gives you this big, burning yes, this big mountain peak, this big goal that just inspires you forever. And the next verse multiplies that times infinity as well. It goes, the next verse is so mind-blowing, and we're not going to do it this week, going to come next week. But the next verse is so mind-blowing that for the first 5 years of my spiritual life, I could never even say it. I read it, and when the devotees would recite it, I would never repeat it. It was like too much. Like it broke my brain. So during the whole month of Kartik, for the first 5 years of my spiritual life, when I heard this, I've sat in Kartik every day for 30 days, for the first 5 years of my spiritual life, so whatever that is, 150 days. The next verse was so beautiful and so kind of mind-blowing that I just sat silently when the devotees recited it. Thought, I can't say that one yet. It's too much. And I always had a thought in my heart of what that verse must mean. And then 30 years later, 25 years later, I read a commentary written by one of our teachers 5 centuries ago. And the thing I'd always thought in my mind that verse must mean, that no one ever said, I read the commentary, and the commentary said exactly what I thought. And I was just like, I was floored by how the poetry was so powerful. They could like impregnate like anyone with deep and profound lessons about life, and short circuit the normal process of learning, and just inject into you truth far beyond what you could have ever figured out on your own. And when I read that, I didn't think, oh wow, I got it right. I thought, wow, just how amazing this is, that even at that young age, these prayers are so potent. They cut through all the darkness and confusion and injected this into me. And it took me 25 years to finally be able to read it and see what was written. And I was stunned. So these ideas were enough to make me think I want to give my life to Krishna. And what the next verse multiplies that times infinity. So we're going to do a little kirtan, like we always do. It's going to be short kirtan, quick arti. And we're going to sit down, we're going to sing this prayer in Sanskrit, offer a lamp to Damodar. You're all welcome to join us if you like. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.